everybody, and welcome back to the Eternal Void, but with jazz. Today, we're joined by Joshua Cutchin. A full-time author and musician, Joshua Cutchin has appeared on hundreds of paranormal programs, such as Coast to Coast AM, and is regularly invited to speak at paranormal conferences about his work. He is the author of 9 books, including 2022's critically acclaimed 2-part series, Ecology of Souls, a new mythology of death and the paranormal. His latest book, Fourth Wall Phantoms, Reflections on the Paranormal, Narrative, and Fiction's Becoming Fact, was released in April of 2025. In addition to his own books, Joshua also regularly contributes to essay collections, most recently Dr. Jack Hunter's Deep Weird in 2023, and Dr. Simon Young's The Cottingley Fairies in 2024. He has appeared on the hit History Channel television series Ancient Aliens and was featured in 2024's breakout UFO documentary Cosmosis. He is a regular guest on the Where Did the Road Go podcast and maintains an online presence at joshuacutchin.com. So, hi Joshua, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you so much. I always get this is something that you realize, as you go along, you're like, oh, everybody writes their own bios. And then when you have to sit and listen to them, you're like, oh, I'm such a narcissist.
No.
But I guess you gotta say some stuff. So anyway, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I've more or less had kind of a lid on podcasts because I've been trying to get a new book finished, which we can maybe talk about a little bit for the first time ever anywhere. But anyway, long story short, this has been the one thing that I've been like, okay, I'm going to do this during this time period. So I've got a week left on the new book, and this is the perfect way to sort of ground and recenter myself as I hopefully slide into home plate this week. So thank you so much.
Wow, and thank you so much for coming on the show. I know I'm super excited for this conversation. I have so many things I want to talk about, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on all these different topics.
I know, me too. Yeah, I feel like this has been such a long time coming, Josh. This is,
yeah. I mean, Shell, how long have we've been emailing back and forth for 8 years, 6 years,
something like that. Yeah, it was right when I moved to Illinois. So that was 2018, 2017?
Which is, God. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's coming up on, it's closer to a decade than it is to not a decade. That's wild.
So scary.
That's wild.
It really feels like, I don't know. It feels like a milestone to see you and have the show and oh my gosh, we're going to get to talk about your work. And I'm really excited to hear what you've been working on. You and I have kind of been talking about some stuff backstage for a little bit, and I haven't really been reading much of the paranormal material lately.
Good for you.
Oh, wow. Why did I just get wicked deja vu? We'll talk about that later. But I would love to hear a little bit about I totally didn't even catch on the Ecology of Souls, but that's on my reading list now. That looks really great. Last time, and then I really want to hear about your work with the that was released in April of 2025 about the narrative and fiction stuff. That sounds super fascinating. So maybe we could work backwards a little bit. Let's talk about the fiction and narrative book that you just released. What's going on there?
Well, how do I even? So I've noticed a trend. Just sort of you kind of find yourself doing things and you don't really realize that you're heading in a certain direction until you take stock of it and you're like, oh, I guess this is sort of where I'm getting pushed, and maybe that's the muse and maybe that's greater cycles or whatever. But I had noticed that I had, for whatever reason, been a little bit preoccupied with fiction. For example, that Fairy Films essay collection was about, the intersection of folklore and film, and I had written my novel in 2023 because that was after you write Ecology of Souls, which is 250,000 words. What the hell do you write next, right? So I'm like, I'm gonna zig. Everybody else thinks I'm gonna zag. I'm gonna zig, and I'm gonna do a novel, and I'm not gonna put any pressure on myself. Anyway, so that was part of that experience, but it was again fiction, right?
Right.
And so it was this sort of thing where it's what what is this leading me to? And I was struggling with a lot of other things that y'all have probably noticed as well. Is like, um, I'm convinced of the reality of the phenomenon, but there is a lot of um, whatever this is also interfaces with what Philip K. Dick would have called the trash stratum, right? Like, like the pulpiness and the urban legends, and like it somehow has a dialogue with that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you get so tired of hearing your 18th favorite case sort of get dismantled in sort of a way that's sometimes problematic, honestly.
Yeah.
But like, you get so tired of that. You're like, well, what is happening here? Because like I've had these intrusions in my life. I know people who have had these intrusions in their life. How do we sort of reconcile these things? And so I really wanted to take a look at the influence, the reciprocal dialogue that I have come to suspect exists between our media and our fictions and our legends and folklore and the phenomenon itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Something that can sort of alleviate the pressure of the people who go out legend tripping to find the spirit of the 18-year-old greaser who crashed their car on Dead Man's Curve in 1954, but the wreck never actually happened, but they still see the phantom car, like that sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
what the hell is going on there, And how do you reconcile that sort of tension between what really happened and what didn't? And it was I think what I've come to sort of settle on is that there really is a dialogue, and it's almost like a religious hagiography in the sense that you have this phenomenon predates everything, probably, right?
Oh yeah.
But we sort of tell our stories about it, and we sort of add our own embellishments. But I do think that those embellishments get picked up by the phenomenon, and then it feeds into more, and so you have this cycle that goes around and around and around and around. Two examples that I would sort of offer for that. This has been talked about ad nauseum in the UFO space.
Okay.
Um, Bertrand Mayust has a book that I understand is wonderful. It's never been translated, so I'm relying on friends of mine's scholarship about it. But specifically on how a lot of the sort of a lot of the quite frankly 60s, 70s, 80s early abductee sort of era stuff drew upon pre-Kenneth Arnold sci-fi pulps that were not available, in certain areas where it was happening. So you would have like, this again, pre-digital era, you'd have like American pulps saying something, but something that appeared first in those American pulps would appear in a French case. It just doesn't really seem to be possible for there to be that sort of contamination. So there was that dialogue that was always happening. And has been sort of discussed over the years. But like, what happens when you put that with the ghost stuff, and what happens when you put that with the cryptid stuff? Because the cryptozoologists hate when I do that, right? They hate when I get really weird with the cryptid stuff. But like, another good example, Gabby, I see one of your pronouns is Faye. A
Yeah.
great example of this is my friend and editor Barbara Fisher. She had a wonderful story. She has a wonderful story where she was, sort of being a witchy person in Ohio, and people were asking her about fairies, and she's like, they don't look like little winged women flying around. That's not what they look like. And then later, like within, I think if I'm remembering the story, and sorry, Barbara, if I'm getting this wrong, but like within a week, she sees like an orb fly up to her back porch, and inside the orb is like a winged woman. And she gets this, we can look however we damn well please. That's sort of
Yeah.
the punchline to that. And so I think that once you start looking into that, for me, a lot of the stuff about the phenomenon seems to make a little bit more sense. Um, I think that you can look at the way that it reinvents. This is tied into this idea that a lot of people in the circles that, Shell and I travel in, talk about the phenomenon constantly updating itself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really cool that all three of us were here for a real major UFO software update, right? At the end of 2020. Was it the end of last year, or was that just at the end of this past year, or was it 2 years ago? The drones, the UFO New Jersey drone things.
I think it was last year, or yeah,
Oh.
and last year, I
I'm
think.
on 2024 or 2025. I can't remember. Either way,
Yeah.
Either way, we were all here for that as it was sort of like, popping off. And it's like, it's not, I'm not saying that the drones were aliens, but I'm saying like drone and alien has become synonymized in the public mind in a lot of ways, which is something that we haven't seen for a while, right? We had the airships and we had the flying saucers, we had the black triangles, and now we've got the drones and the tic tacs, right? So it's kind of interesting to see the way that culture is interacting and interfacing with all these phenomena. I think that, for example, the electrical interference that you see in UFO stories is a reinvention of ghosts blowing out candles. It's the same idea. You've got the sort of our our technology, even candles are technology, is being interfered with by the other. So I think that once you sort of start looking at this at the level of motif and the level of this dialogue between culture and the phenomenon, it starts to get more interesting. I'm really rambling on that, but that's sort of the broad strokes of where I wanted to go, and then to just provide some examples of people who saw hoaxed, people who saw craft that had appeared in photographs that were later revealed to be hoaxes, but they independently saw them. Like, I love stories like that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, where the hell did they get that from? So yeah, and then you can sort of tease out, obviously, some very much larger implications. For what that means. A lot of the book centers around something that is a big fancy word, but we all know what it means. It's called metalepsis, which is it's the narratologist's way of describing a fourth wall break. But I've constantly been fascinated in what John Keel called the reflective factor, which a lot of people have said, you look at the phenomenon and the phenomenon looks back at you, right?
Right.
Your mileage may vary. Mine certainly has over the years. There have been times when that seems very true and times when it doesn't. But that idea is something that you see embodied in the life of a John Keel. You see that embodied in the life of a Whitley Strieber, quite frankly. And to me, that was very similar to what a fourth wall break is slash was. Fourth wall breaks, for example, they take the terminology originates from the theater, where there's this idea that there's an invisible wall between the people on the stage and the audience. But it occurred to me that once you start really looking into the scholarship of metalepsis, which, holy cow, that exists, and it's a lot of it's really dry, but it's also like it's kind of like contentious. Like, scholars are going back and forth about what does and doesn't constitute metalepsis and different degrees. It's a whole rabbit hole. Like, it is, narratology is its own rabbit hole, but this is its own rabbit hole too. So a lot of my job was just sort of metabolize this, right? For everybody else. But like, once you start reading it, you're like, oh, the characters are often led to look at things as absurd or have existential dread, or once they realize that they are players in a piece of media, they can violate those rules and reach outside, and they're in contact with the narrator. It's like, this is like the metaphor for paranormal facilitated enlightenment, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But where this scholarship really kicked my ass, because every time I write a book, right? It's like you write it and you're like, I think there's something here. I think there's something here. Are you barking up the wrong tree, etc.? Where it really kicked my tail was I was reading about some of the earliest examples of metalepsis in the Western world. In the, sort of outside the West is its own kind of thing, because a lot of other cultures have never really had that sort of demarcation like we have in the West. But anyway, in the Western world, some of the earliest examples of this fourth wall break, this metalepsis, are on Grecian urns. And if you think about a Grecian urn, like, the characters are almost always in profile, right? Like, you never dead on. But there have been exceptions that narratologists and art scholars have noticed. And the fourth wall breaks on Grecian urns are sleepers, the dead, those in altered states of consciousness, gods, and monsters.
Well, how about that?
It's like, that's the paranormal usual suspects, right? It's like, you'll dig this, y'all will dig this too. And they were like, oh, but there are some exceptions. Sometimes they're animals like panthers, and it's like, well, there you go. Like, if you're a Fortean at all, like, your radar is popping off. In some of the, in fact, in some of the examples that they used of those panthers breaking the fourth wall, it was specifically designed for people to drink from the vase and sort of become the panther. So I'm like, oh, this is so on the nose. So that was when I was like, okay, well, maybe there is something to this. And then another moment where I had where I was like, okay, this does seem to be worth teasing out across the whole of the paranormal, and quite frankly, sort of wading into those waters of philosophy, was when I learned that there's sort of a loose rule, again, in classical texts, that significant enough trauma in a narrative will tease out metalepsis, will tease out a fourth wall break from the narrator.
Yeah.
And that was another one of those holy cow moments, right? Because that's, there's something about this experience has to do with trauma. And it's
Yeah.
like whenever you experience that trauma, reality acknowledges it.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
reality sort of breaks and weeps for you, you know.
Yeah.
Which is what you see in these texts, and it's like the Princess Bride too. Like it's the same idea. Like every time there's something that's horrific, like little Fred Savage has to say something that breaks the flow. But like it's that same idea, um, And so it was like, okay, well this seems, and again, I don't know if this is accurate, but I think that it's a very um, it's a rewarding metaphor through which to look at
Yeah.
this phenomena slash these phenomena. Yeah. So that's thank you for attending my TED talk. I guess that's my
I
rambling
loved
answer
it.
to this such a basic question, but yeah.
No, that's amazing. And Gabby, I know you've got so many questions because Josh, you just like checkerboarded all over a lot of stuff that Gabby and I have been talking about lately, with some of our own stuff. Yeah, and I love that you brought up trauma as like a kind of a co-created like dance with the universe as a sort of initiation into that fourth wall break. I think definitely think there's a lot there, and I'm excited to read like maybe anything that you've written on that in your book. Because like if this is good for anything, it's hopefully good for healing trauma in some sort of way, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that I've run into some people who want to downplay the role of trauma in this particular domain, but I don't see the wisdom in that.
I don't either. Yeah.
Everybody's got it. One of the things that they teach you in rehab is that we don't compare the degree of it either.
Nope.
And it's something that everybody's got. And I think that, I do think that there is a problem to say that it's a hard and fast rule that it's a requisite. Like you have to have some sort of, I think that UFOs and Bigfoot like appear to people just for shits and giggles, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think it has to always has to be profound, but I do think that
No.
I do think that you're selling the importance of this experience and this aspect of life. I think you're selling it short when you sort of strike that from the record. I really do. Um,
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times, like, even if you are having sort of a positive, spiritual experience, like, even that in and of itself can feel traumatic in the moment just because your former worldview is, you know, kind of proven to be not exactly what you thought it was.
yeah, and this is the razor's edge to walk. It's like and I sort of here's my farty chair. I told you it was going to be creaking. The razor's edge to walk is to invite people to come to this conclusion that I'm about to say of their own. Like you don't want to put this on people, but I will say, as someone who, because the book opens up with like situating. The book opens up, quite frankly, with my experience in rehab in 2020 for alcoholism. Because I really wanted to show that, like, you know, say what you want to about Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, but like they're the reason I'm alive. Like
Right.
because I had that going into that and was like dissecting my experience and being like, if these myth themes are true and there are certain routes that the universe wants you to take, certain beats on the hero's journey or something, how did I get here? And
Yeah.
what is this on that hero's journey? And like, how do you pull yourself out of this mess that you're in? Like, so it opens up with that. But I say all that to say that, to your point, Gabby, about the sort of powerful transformation of trauma, like the people that I've gotten to know in the recovery community who have internalized those lessons and who have like really taken them to heart and are moving forward, not getting stuck in a loop. are the ones who would not trade their rock bottom for a damn thing. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's the worst thing in the world when it happens to you. But
Hmm.
if you can get beyond it, 5 or 6 years, it you look on it like as the best thing that happened to you too. And that's something that I think our culture has ill prepared us for, is that sort of that pivot and that switch to look at things at being two things at once, right? Like, nobody
Yes.
needs to go through this.
Right.
Nobody needs to go through some of the things that I've heard from some of my friends. But it can also be the catalyst for something incredible.
Wholly agree. And also just congrats on all that you've overcome with that. That's not easy, and just like
Thanks.
big hand to you. Yeah,
Thanks.
I know that's tough.
The wild thing, and I don't know if this resonates with either of y'all's experiences in terms of what you've had going on, but like the period of time, like 6 months after making that decision, it was like sync city. It was like
Oh yeah.
synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity, like in your
Yeah.
face. The one that I actually mentioned, I mentioned a couple in the book, but the one that I always mentioned that just blew my mind is like, so I have twin boys, and like I get really, I'm better about it now, but I get really worked up about like, the software that I feel like I need to upload them with. Like I need to tell them about
Yeah.
the October Revolution and like entropy and like all these things that like that you've learned through osmosis, and you're like, well, where did I
Yeah.
learn it from? Like I've got to somehow make sure that they're a well-rounded people. And I was like, you know what? And so I would seize on these things, and I'm OCD, so I would seize on these
Yeah.
things and I would sort of repeat them. And one day I was like, Aesop's Fables. Holy cow, Aesop's Fables. How did I learn Aesop's Fables? Did I watch a cartoon? Did I read a book? It must have been a cultural osmosis, but whatever. Aesop's Fables. Aesop's Fables have a lot of good morals in them. I need to Aesop's Fables. Okay, whatever you do, you're gonna get home today from your aftercare, and you're gonna go and you're gonna get online, and just get them a copy of Aesop's Fables. So I pull into the garage, and I get out, and my wife's like, "You gotta take the boys for a walk around the neighborhood." And I'm like, "Damn it, I need to go in and buy Aesop's Fables." Okay. So I'm pushing them around the neighborhood in their little stroller, and I'm like, "Aesop's Fables, Aesop's Fables, Aesop's. Whatever you do, don't forget, you got to start somewhere. We're gonna start with Aesop's Fables. We're gonna teach them about Aesop's Fables." I get them into the garage, and I get a call from my mom, and my mom says, "Hey, Josh, we're at that bookstore at the beach that we always used to go to. I just picked up something for the boys. It's a book of Aesop's Fables." And I don't know, there are a lot of ways to look at that, like, clairvoyance or time loops and retrocausality, or I don't know what, but definitely a synchronicity. Like, of all the things I could
Yeah.
have thought of, it wasn't
Mhm.
Mother Goose, it wasn't, the Brothers Grimm or anything like that. And yet, she had the same day that was what she was going to pick up, was the day that I hyper focused for reasons I don't even understand on it. So it's stuff like that in the wake of the recovery experience that I think there's something about, it's the trauma is the one side of it, but then also like there's a rebirth narrative thing going on there,
Mhm.
and like a sacrifice narrative, quite frankly, too.
Yeah.
Because like I'm not gonna lie, like I gave up the thing in the world that I love the most. Like like
Yeah.
it's so I think there's something about that, and then it has sort of like a half-life, right? Like it kind of,
Hmm.
there's a lot of stuff front loaded, and then over time, like I think the synchronicity sort of like fade like an echo or something. But yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. No, 100%. And yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that and like kind of boost it a little bit, when I was trying to like quit smoking like tobacco, like 2022 ish, 2023, same thing, just like synchronicity city. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. And I'm like, I'm trying to quit smoking and all of this stuff's happening. And it makes me want to sleep.
Right. Yeah, there is that too. There is that too. That's funny. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know what it is, but like it's so hard to convey, and that's why I've stopped like trying to convince people of any of this stuff. Because it's so hard to convey to them the gravity and the magnitude of this stuff when it happens to you. And I think that's by design. It's like I love my wife to death. She has a very vivid dream life, and
Mhm.
I glaze over. Like I've tried, y'all. I glaze over about 30 seconds in, because it's like I just wasn't there. It wasn't for me. And I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of synchronicities are like. Like they don't. Obviously you have some really dramatic ones that exist that you've heard from other people that are jaw dropping, but like a lot of little things happen in people's lives that, like, if I told you, you'd be like, yeah, so what? You had to be there, and they're for each of us. I really do think that they are.
Yeah, what I found with trying to convey like the importance of synchronicities is like, it is kind of, you've really got to set yourself up for disappointment if you want people to be as impressed as you were when it happened. But also, like,
100%.
yeah, Jung defined synchronicities like the word personally meaningful, or the phrase personally meaningful exists in the definition.
Yeah.
And that gets glazed over a lot in like the big crazy stories that everybody enjoys, but it still is something that is personally meaningful.
Well,
and you got to read it that way.
The worst thing is people who will see somebody else's synchronicity and then like try to find that in their life as their own synchronicity. Like there was the whole thing going around for a couple of years ago with the Mylar balloons because they were a synchronicity in Hellier, and it's like,
yeah,
and everybody was like, I saw a Mylar balloon, and it's like, that's not your synchronicity. Stop it. Like, go find your own synchronicity, you know? Like, and that's, you know, that's so much of what I think of what we're doing is we're being called to sort of do our own myth making in our lives, right? And that's not what a lot of us, that's not what a lot of us are, well, we're conditioned to not do that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the balloons were a particularly interesting symbol, as they are kind of a symbol that can be picked up and held by anybody. Like just the balloon on its own is a very, very particular symbol, and especially like the Mylar. Like, I don't know. There's an essay rattling around in my brain that's not quite put together on that yet.
Mylar and memory metal. I mean, there's something to you know, Roswell memory metal and Mylar. There's something to tug on there. Yeah, but I just really want to see people engaging with this in a more meaningfully personal way. You know.
Yes, write your own story.
Because yeah. So, which is an appropriate way to phrase it, because that's sort of where I end up with a lot of this. In Fourth Wall Phantoms is that like that's part of what we're being called to do is this, you know, leaning on the work of Jeffrey Kripal too, is we're being called to sort of authorize our own experience and to have that fourth wall break that is the extraordinary experience. And then once you do that, I do think that reality gets a little bit more wishy-washy or a little bit more pliable. It's kind of like spraining your ankle. Like, you know, you sprain it once really bad and then you're more likely to have sprains on that ankle. Yeah. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, definitely had some experiences where things get a little squidgy and kind of learn to read it. It's like, oh, that's happening again. All right, let's see where that goes. Yeah. That's super interesting. I can't wait to read this book. Gabby, it looks like you've got something you want to ask.
Yeah. I guess I want to talk a little bit more about. We talked a little bit with like the Grecian vases, and you know the different people or different figures who are sort of allowed to sort of break the fourth wall, and it makes me sort of think about the role that consciousness itself sort of plays into both narrative making and the phenomena itself. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about consciousness and what role it plays in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, so I found myself, so a lot of what some of my projects do is they end up pushing me into places that I have to be like drawn kicking and screaming to look into. So in this case it was philosophy. Like, you know, I didn't really want to because I just don't think I'm smart enough for it, you know. Or I'm smart in other ways, but like I'm not wired for whatever this is. So like the idea of like being forced to engage with like idealism and dual aspect monism and panpsychism, and trying to find ways to like digest that were important. But like I think what is so interesting to me about these sort of authorial interpretations of reality is that they really do play well with everything else but materialism, right? Everything else but physicalism. And you know, there's an argument to be made that like a lot of what I'm talking about in this book are just synchronicities or they're retrocausality. Like a lot of time is spent like being like, is this manifestation or is this retrocausality? Why do we kind of even care? Is there a difference? But so in that sense, you know, you do get the idea that it's hard to I find it harder and harder to walk away from a lot of these experience, a lot of this literature, this space, and not find yourself being an idealist, you know. So if panpsychism is the idea that consciousness isn't everything, idealism would be the idea that everything is in consciousness of some sort.
Okay.
um uh Again, see what I mean, like, about
Yeah,
being
yeah.
different. But a way to think of that is, though, that, like, we all know this in our daily lives, like, and I've talked to people about this and they still don't get it, but, like, I've got, what have I got here? I've got sugar cookie chapstick, right?
Nice.
This started out as an idea of somebody's, right? Like, everything about it, the design and the logo and the idea to even make it, and the pe- petroleum and diglycerol polyacetylipide. Anyway, these are all ideas, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what they are. Like, fourth wall phantoms is an idea. Everything is an idea, and I don't know why it's so hard for people to sort of understand that everything starts out as an idea. And that doesn't mean that, like, you should jump off the roof of your building because you think you can fly. There are certain tendencies that reality has, right?
Hmm.
But so much of what we take for granted starts within consciousness. And I think that one of the healthier ways to sort of approach these phenomena in general, back to your original question about the role of consciousness, is from the role of phenomenology. Um, I think that it does us no, it is a disservice to what the phenomenon is to get hung up on this binary question of does it exist or not. Like, that's the least interesting question to
Yeah.
ask.
Right.
Yeah. And there are certain questions that don't get asked until you move beyond that ontological premise, right? And so if you look at phenomenology, which can sort of be glossed as the objective study of the subjective, or more particularly, like, how things arise in consciousness, I think it's a much more authentic way to sort of have these questions and have these conversations. So you sort of allow yourself a chance to to interrogate this stuff without getting hung up on, well, did the saucer really land over at this spot, or, like, anyway. So I think that if you really had to hold my feet to the fire, and it changes like week to week, right? But, like, if you really had to hold my feet to the fire today and ask me what I thought was going on, I think that most of this stuff unfolds as an experience in consciousness, some sort of altered state of consciousness, that is just as real as the one that we're filtering right now.
Hmm.
I'm presuming that both of y'all exist. I but at the end of the day, like, even if you were in the room with me, I still wouldn't know that for certain because it's being filtered through that, right? I think that these altered states of consciousness are just as real, and I think that we also have a really poor understanding of this false dichotomy. Again, I'm just tired of these binaries, right? I'm just tired of these
Yeah.
binaries. I'm tired of, is it internal or external? Is it psychic or physical? Is it, quite frankly, true or false, or is it fact or fiction? And this, I guess, is a really postmodern take on it. But what it really strikes me as is, like, that's the only way to sort of articulate what I think so many of these experiences show us. The example that I use, right? When I wrote Where the Footprints End about weirdness and Bigfoot, like, there were some people who were like, well, ghosts don't leave footprints, so Bigfoot must be a big hairy animal. And I'm like, but no. Have you read your parapsychological literature? Because, like, before we had EMF meters and all these gadgets and gobbledygook, like, we would spread talcum powder on a floor and literally wait for a ghost to leave footprints behind. Like, that was early ghost hunting 101.
Yeah.
Ghosts open doors and slam doors, and um, there are things called apports that manifest out of
Oh
nowhere.
yeah.
So, which, well, it's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
I think that crash material is apports, but that's a whole other conversation. Crash debris from UFOs. But the point is that, like, yeah, I think that we can have phenomena that, again, that don't fit into this, that don't slot into this psychic physical binary, internal external fact fiction. It kind of walks the line between both. The analogy that I've been using is, like, when I wake up in the morning, I care about like getting breakfast and how well I slept and like, so there's a psychic part of all of us, right? There is. But I don't think we're predominantly psychic. I don't think that's our default mode. I think it's maybe, I don't know, 80/20. Let's say 80/20, right? What if the UFO is like a mirror image of that? What if the UFO is 20/80, right? What if the UFO is 20% physical and 80% psychic, right?
Mm.
And just as just as none of us can deny that important aspect of ourselves, and we can slip into that space and interact in that space, and who knows, maybe I leave footprints over there when I astral travel, right? I think that this stuff is predominantly of that other space, but can slip over into the space where they do leave burn marks in the ground, and they do leave footprints, and they do knock things off shelves. And that's sort of what I think that the bigger thing that we're getting invited into with these discussions of consciousness and fact and fiction, I think that's really where the end game is in a lot of respects.
Yeah. Yeah. 200% if such a thing is possible. And I'm not going to argue with anybody if they say it's not, but yeah, like,
Well, life's too short to argue about any of this stuff, right?
I know, it really is. It really is. Like, I'm often like tasked with like trying to explain to like, friends and like people who may not be into like necessarily the weird stuff. It's like, oh, you do a podcast? What do you do? It's like, well, we talk about like UFOs and ghosts and folklore. And it's like, but I really try to take a teleological view of it. And then I watch their eyes glaze over, and it's like, yeah, like, I don't care if I don't want to argue if UFOs are real. I want to know the person I'm talking to. How did it affect them?
Yeah,
like, how did it change their life?
Yeah. And that's those are the kind of conversations that I want to have, right? Like as soon as you start, so that glazing over, like you start talking to me about burn marks and propulsion systems and isotopes, and that's the reaction that I have. Like, this is not. Yeah, I think that this stuff belongs in the humanities. Honestly, I just don't think it. You know, I mean, like we can. Yeah, so let's. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you about the last, or I don't even know if the Last Supper is on canvas. So I'm going to talk to you about the Mona Lisa, and I'm going to talk to you about the Mona Lisa, and I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Mona Lisa. Here's the composition of the canvas of the Mona Lisa, and this is where the paints were made. And like, it's like, no, that's not the point of the damn Mona Lisa. It's like, it's not the point of the Mona Lisa. I think that's what we're being called to do here.
100% agree with you. Looking at our question list, and Gabby wrote down a question. Can I steal one of your questions, Gabby? I like this one.
Yeah, go for it.
Josh, let's talk a little bit about fictional incursion. What is fictional incursion?
Well, that's another another thing that I wanted to sort of engage with. So you can see how sort of all these topics are kind of like playing well with each other in this idea for fourth wall phantoms. And the fictional incursion idea is this idea that people have reported characters from fiction in our reality, right? Which sounds absurd, but if you sort of dial it back enough, maybe that's all that we're dealing with the paranormal, is things from myth and legend that are maybe fiction in one sense, but quite real in another. So the famous example is John Constantine.
Yes.
Alan Moore. Yeah. The weird thing about Constantine is that he's appeared like 8 times to 8 different people. Barbara thinks that she might have had a run-in with Constantine too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, this is going to be like 20 stories, and then I can move on into the UFO stuff and put that down.
Yeah.
Nope. I was quite shocked. So whenever I write a book, right, there's always 1 or 2 texts where it's like, I just wish I could copy paste this whole thing, not to like steal it, but just to be like, you have to read this to get the scope of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And in this case, there's a book called Embodied Imaginations by Chidambaram Ramesh, and it's a full book that deals just with authors experiencing these things. Ooh. And it's not fringe figures either. It's like Dickens and Ibsen and Diderot and like all these different people, or Joan Didion, sorry, not Diderot. Conrad, all these different people, and who have had some degree of interaction with their characters, right?
Hmm.
And it's not like, oh, it was like some of them, right? Some of them are like, oh, I will sort of follow the lead of my character as I'm writing, which, I've experienced too. Like I have
Yeah.
some very like straight ahead atheist author friends who told me like, oh yeah, whenever I write sci-fi, I have to listen to what the characters tell me, and I'm like, hold, hold on a minute, like, do you hear yourself? So part of my fiction, again, I was sort of winding towards this. Part of my reason I wrote my novels because I wanted to experience that, and I got a little bit of that. But like some of the most extreme examples are like, yeah, I opened up the bathroom and this character was sitting on the toilet. Then I close it and I open it again, like they were gone, So like some of these are extremely tangible. Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, said that she had a bunch of experiences where characters would come and sit down on her couch. And again, these are sometimes it's a little bit more explicit than others, but like there is
Hmm.
definitely a sense of presence that is, I would say, at least as tangible as a lot of people have during religious experiences, right? And so it happens with a lot of authors. Like there's some studies with numbers that I can't cite because I don't have the PDF pulled up, but like there have been studies that have been done where it's like 80% of authors have had an experience kind of like this to some degree. And I can vouch for that. Like there is this weird thing where it's like you get ideas and you're like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
And which again is part of the interesting thing about the creative process. But anyway, so I thought that it was just going to be a little bit, and it was just this whole gigantic rabbit hole of its own.
Hmm.
And then it gets, and then you can be like, well, maybe it's just that these are really creative people and they have such vivid imaginations. And it's like, no, like you get people who run into characters that they didn't write, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and you also have people, there's this interesting idea that Fort talked about, where he talked about, for centuries, millennia maybe, but centuries, like we all knew how steam engine technology could work. Like
Hmm.
if you ever put a kettle on, like it was obvious that there was pressure and et cetera. But like nobody ever really sort of tried to use that on an industrial scale until the Industrial Revolution. But the Romans could have had steam engines, right? Um, and but so Fort said it was like it wasn't. There just came a time when it was steam engine time, and then that was
Right.
when it was supposed to happen. And so that specific term has been picked up in like the sci-fi author community for when like multiple people get the same idea for a book at the same time, and it happens a lot.
Oh,
I mean, we've all experienced this to a degree with like, the twin film syndrome where you get Dante's Peak and Volcano in the same year, or Deep Impact and Armageddon. Like
yeah, yeah,
some
yeah.
some of that's like cultural zeitgeist, and some of it's like corporate espionage and stuff like that. But some of it's like really like, no, we just both came up with this idea at the same time. So, um, again, it's all sort of asking the idea of where ideas come from, which is the weirdest question when you actually sit with it that you've ever had. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's I don't yeah the best things that I've ever done, I'm not responsible for. And I think a lot of creatives will tell you that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's one thing that's always fascinated me and maybe even brought me towards like, the podcast and wanting to talk to people is like during the pandemic, I started spending more time on Twitter and like discovered weird Twitter because I was like into this like weird podcast and stuff. And like I was watching in real time, like on these Twitter feeds, just like not quite ideas like memes traveling like viruses, but like there was certainly things like you could watch ideas move through like this ethereal plane that was
Yeah,
then like mirrored to you on like this screen in your pocket.
yeah. I think
Yeah, and
that's
it
I
was,
think that's really prescient. I think a lot more stuff probably works like that than we realize. I mean, so there's another example of Rupert Sheldrake, who did his work on morphic resonance. I'm not sure if
yeah.
either of you are familiar with Rupert Sheldrake, but
Oh yeah.
so he's had some cool research on like dogs and like controlling for when basically dogs always run to the door when their owners start home, even if you control for them starting home like 40 miles away where they shouldn't be able to hear anything. Like
Yeah.
If you're in touch and you can record when they turned the car around to come home, the dog will go to the door. Really cool stuff like that. But he's done some work with morphic resonance, which is this idea that like there were these milk bottles in one part of England, and there were these birds that like in this one area learned how to pop the lids off the milk bottles, and over the course of like a week, every bird in England figured it out. And there wasn't really a mechanism for the birds to teach each other that they could really pinpoint either. It's just like the idea that once the seal was broken, pardon the pun, they all sort of learned it at the same time. And there is some anecdotal evidence, and I haven't really followed up on this, but there is some anecdotal evidence that if you have two identical mazes and two different rats in New York and San Francisco, um, and you run the maze with the rats in San Francisco, the rats first, if you do that first and they learn to run the maze, the rats in New York will have an easier time running that maze. You know,
Heard of
and
that.
it's like
Yeah.
the idea has been settled or cleared, and that's just such a compelling possibility to me. You know, that something like that functions in reality.
Yeah,
I
for
I don't see why it doesn't. Go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it reminds me of like this quote from Carl Jung. I forget like the actual phrasing of it, but he compared, thoughts to animals. So like imagine you're going on a walk, right? And you see like a cat crossing the street. You don't think to yourself, "Oh, I invented that cat. That cat is me." It just happens to exist in the world. You just happen to see it. And maybe thoughts are the same way. Like maybe there's some mental space where these thoughts just exist and
I
some of us just happen to see them before other people, and because of our connections we're able to kind of like ping other people like, hey, look at this.
I totally agree, Gabby. I totally agree. I mean, so yeah, like I joke that like I do my best writing between the desk and the fridge. Like it's just because the moment sometimes I'll get halfway, I'm like, oh shit, I gotta turn around and I gotta write something down because like Stephen King's talked about the boys in the basement who do all the real work, while he's
Yeah.
like, they sort of have this sort of strided idea. P.L. Travers, who was a mentor of Whitley Strieber's, I did not know. P.L. Travers, who did Harry Potter, who did Mary Poppins, Mary Potter, Harry Poppins. P.L. Travers, who did Mary Poppins, felt that Mary Poppins was like that, sort of floated down like a balloon idea,
Yeah.
floated down like Mary Poppins into reality, and ascribed to the idea that ideas were like balloons, and like you could catch some of them, or sometimes they were out there, floating out there for somebody else. It's that apocryphal. Speaking of Jung, it's that apocryphal quote. People don't have ideas; ideas have people.
Mhm.
And until you've been seized by something like that, it's like you don't experience it. I'm not trying to be like elitist and being like, oh, if you got to be an artist to understand, but like it is weird. Like I've talked to my wife about like writing and stuff. She's like, well, if you're having a hard time, like you can stop writing. I'm like, you don't understand. Like
Yeah.
the launch button has been pressed. Like we have to, yeah, the missile is launching. We've just got to, do our best to bring it into home plate. I'm mixing metaphors, but you take my meaning, yeah.
So I remember, I think it was probably right around the time I first moved here. I was at the gym and I was kind of like, didn't really know anybody and everything was new. And I was like a little overwhelmed. And I looked up at the TV and the gym had like, it was Planet Fitness. They had like Fox News, CNN, History Channel, TBN, Cartoon Network, at every gym. And like on the History Channel, I look up and it's like, oh shit, that's Joshua Cutchin.
Oh, really? Oh,
on Ancient Aliens. Josh, what was that experience like?
Oh, I mean, like, I don't know how much I've really talked about it publicly, but I was just talking to somebody about it today because it's so weird because I do have people who like will say something. Oh, I saw you on Ancient Aliens, and it's like I don't know how you did because like they only used like 18 seconds of me. Like it was a very brief clip. Yeah, I kind of wear that as a little bit of a badge of pride that they only took that much of me because like there were certain questions that were asked. I mean, yeah, so inside baseball. You know, it was about sort of a Trojan feast sort of stuff, and it was about food and drink, and they were like some of the an example of one of the questions that I was asked was like, The cornucopia, the horn of plenty, seen in early American folk art, shows food coming abundantly and endlessly from, a large basket. Could this be ancient alien replicator technology? And I'm like, I sit there for a second and I say, it's a common motif in myth, legend, and folklore to show an abundance of food coming from a supernatural source. Like that's
Yeah.
the best I could do because I'm not gonna be like this is the Zebel Ganubi star people using their replicators to feed the pilgrims. Like I'm not gonna do that, right? So yeah, it was kind of like there's that if you guys have ever seen Monsters Inc. If y'all have ever seen that,
Yes.
there's that when Mike Wazowski's like on the he's excited to be on the cart on the commercial and he's blocked out and he's like, wow, it's kind of like that because it was like, oh, I'm gonna be on here and it was just like I think there's like 18 seconds I timed at one time. And like, but then that was it. And it's kind of like, well, I kind of don't mind that because I was just trying to be, I tried to be authentic and true, and I never really got the call back on that. So,
Yeah.
but it's fine in a lot of ways because so much of this, I do think, I do try to take heart, um, in the fact that I think that a lot of the higher resolution conversations are getting boosted nowadays. I know that's a hard thing to sort of see in the realm of disclosure and all this stuff
Right.
and who disclosure is coming from and the time that disclosure is coming from like none of this is freaking optimal, right? But I think that at the important level, which has always been the grassroots level, it's always been the individual level, it's always been this level that we're having right here, right? This has
Right.
been this is
Right.
where this is the level at which the phenomenon matters. I'm sorry, it does. At this level, the conversations are more nuanced than I thought they would ever be, and they're staying high resolution, and they're not really being dissuaded and not being told what to think. And so, yeah, the fact that I didn't get on Ancient Aliens more by talking about replicators and aliens visiting the first Thanksgiving or whatever, like that's fine because I this is where I thrive and this is where I am and these are my people. Y'all are my people. So.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that was sort of the inside baseball on my Ancient Aliens experience. I didn't realize that I made it to Planet Fitness though. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. That probably more than once because I feel like, yeah, well, Ancient Aliens is, yeah, definitely.
Every now and then, like there'll be a
Yeah.
musician friend of mine who'll send me a picture of their TV, and I'm like, yeah, that was me. Yeah, yeah.
Although,
That's
like now,
amazing.
I wonder if we're gonna start like hearing stories of people encountering aliens with like cornucopias now after this episode.
Right? We planted that seed into the phenomenon. It's going to start doing that for us. Yeah.
Oh, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Let's see. Looking at what other Gabby, is there anything else you wanted to ask? Because
Ooh,
I am just
yeah. I feel like we kind of covered everything. I mean, not everything, but like this might actually be a good place.
Well, it's
I
one of those things. It's like when you have too much time or too little time. It's like, well, we could end here, and this could be this, or we could open up another can of worms. I mean, if you want to go a little bit longer,
Are
for
you
whatever
cool?
reason, I'm fine. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm totally down with that.
Let's go to 7:30.
Okay, rock on. Let's do it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yay. Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun. Like y'all are great.
Oh, back at you. No, I've been looking forward to this for so long. Like it's in my mind, I can see like this happened and then this happened and then this and like this whole like little chain of like causality that just nothing seemed connected at the time. It's like now I'm talking to Joshua Cutchin. This is amazing. But anyway, and you've both been there for me like during like some really crazy, intense, weird periods in my life. So I'm very grateful to both of you. Thank you. Just meant to say that earlier.
Well, you're very welcome. And it's like I said, in a different context with somebody, it's like all this weird stuff is fine, but if you're not a decent human being, like what difference does it make? I'd rather be known for that than anything else. So yeah.
Yeah, that's and it's easy to I find it's easy to say and it's hard to do. And I'm trying to look for a way to shoehorn the weird into like helping me with the other, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. But back to like the more weird stuff, and maybe like, well, maybe this might be like walking that razor's edge of both here. But can we circle back a little bit to like the ecology of souls? Like, tell us a
Oh,
little bit about that work.
so a little bit about that work. I mean, it's I had to split it into three damn books.
Three? I thought
No,
it was
it
just
was
two. Okay.
yeah. But maybe the best thing to do is to sort of say some of these broad themes and like how this
Yeah.
sort of makes sense at like a 10,000 foot view.
This.
Um,
Yeah.
a couple things that always bug me. There's this haunting quote by Anne Strieber. They were getting a bunch of correspondence in from Communion after that was written, and Whitley had Anne handle all the correspondence, and he found this like notepad that she had where she was writing down observations from this people, because like people like art, they were probably one of the first. That was probably one of the few and first opportunities for people to have experiences and write into somebody and wouldn't be taken as crazy people, right?
Right.
It's like tens of thousands of letters that are now housed at Rice University. But Anne had made this observation. This has something to do with what we call death, which is just such a haunting thing.
Yeah.
Not only the idea that death and the UFO thing, but also what we call death. I love the way that's phrased. So that's the sort of thing that somebody like me hears, and it's like, well, let's unpack that. And then the thing that was sort of sticking with me was like, if you take a look at Jacques Vallée's 1969 work, Passport to Magonia, he does
Mhm.
a really good job of illustrating that a lot of these themes that we see in the UFO context are things that we've seen, very specific characteristics from spirit phenomena. He was mostly comparing Western European fairy folklore. You can obviously expand this to all across the world, as I think you should. But the thing that didn't get talked about is the fact that a lot of cultures prior to Theosophy, prior to the rise of Theosophy and Madame
Mhm.
Blavatsky, who sort of really leaned on Paracelsus and Steiner got up in the mix, and they were talking about like fairies as elementals. Prior to all that, if you went to most of Western European cultures, villages, and you went to, I would argue, uh, similar traditions in Africa and in South America and in North America and all over the world. If you went to these people, they would sort of draw a connection between fairies and the dead, right? Like
Right.
so the question becomes like, what would a 1345 version of Passport Magonia have looked like? It probably would have been like, hey, these fairies look like the dead, right? Um, but what happens when you do the transitive property, right? Like if the dead look like the fairies and the fairies look like the aliens, then what does that say about the dead and aliens? Um, so that was something else that I thought would sort of interface with that interestingly and nicely. And then there was this other stuff, which is like, Kenneth Ring had put alien abductions in dialogue with near-death experiences back in the 90s with the Omega Project, and about all the
Oh.
how much of this looks very similar. Ascension narrative, bright light, feelings of peace, coming back. People who come back from these experiences have practically the same set of abilities, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Poltergeist stuff, clairvoyance, electronics interference, like it's the same stuff. But also Eddie Bullard had done a lot of work looking at alien abductions and the sorts of initiatory ceremonies across different cultures that would have had shamanisms, or
Mhm.
their culture specific term for shamanism, right? Because shamanism is specifically like Siberian, but like
Right. Yeah.
for lack of a better term, shamanic figures in their communities. Why are these things the same? Well, a lot of, not all, you can't speak monolithically about cultures like this, but like a lot of these initiatory experiences were near death experiences. The idea was to
Mhm.
bring you past some sort of threshold,
Right.
perceived or literal, and bring you back with these abilities. So the abductions look like the shamanism, and NDEs look like the abductions, and shamanism sometimes involves these NDEs, and it's like, oh, these are all starting to play together real nice now.
Yeah.
And so it was about putting all those things in dialogue with each other, but then being like, okay, how can we, like, because I have a contrarian streak, like, how far can we push this? And sort of
Okay.
noting some of these similarities that people aren't talking about. Like, we have this misnomer that everything that comes out of a flying saucer, another contrarian streak, right? I'm not saying UAP.
Mm.
Everything that comes out of a flying saucer must be a gray, but like if you actually look at the data, like it might be 70 or 80 or 90% of people are experiencing light beings. Especially
Yeah.
nowadays, especially now as sort of the alien abduction narrative has sort of tapered off a little bit, which is its own rabbit hole to talk about. But like people are seeing light beings, and like that's the same thing that a lot of people see in near-death experiences. So you can start talking about that. You can talk about these hums and these buzzes that people have in these experiences.
Hmm.
That sort of kick off the start of the experience that you see across a lot of psychedelic experiences. That's another thing because psychoactive chemicals or sorry, psychoactive substances, I need to be precise in my language, are used in a lot of initiatory traditions. Sometimes they're explicitly called the vine of the dead, as ayahuasca is. Or if you look at, the Faux people, and I believe it's the Faux, in the Congo, in their traditions around Iboga, like it's specifically designed to help you meet with the ancestors. Like, so this is all sounding like the same thing about like
Right.
this continuum of human of ourselves. Um, and so the humming and there's the tunnel experience, which arguably kind of sounds like a trip to fairyland. And once you get to fairyland, it looks just like the afterlife. And if you go through the contactees, they were describing planets that sound like the afterlife. And like it all comes together in such a way that I said at the time, and obviously I haven't done it, but I said at the time, like, oh, I could sort of step away from all this and feel like I had an answer for me, right? Which
Yeah.
is the idea that this is big and weird and messy, but it is about death in one sense. But as Barbara said, it's about like death and life. It's about that cycle
Yes.
that we go through. Because ufology started as a spiritual pursuit. It just was. Like you can look
Yeah.
back at it. All of them, a lot of those people, a lot of the early contactees were theosophists and spiritualists.
Hmm.
They had a lot of reincarnation narratives. Not that I buy every contactee narrative necessarily, but like that's baked into this thing. If you look back at a lot of cultures from across the world, viewed the underworld as the night sky below the ecliptic, below the path of the sun. So there was already a conflation between the dead and like the spirit world, and the
Right.
underworld is past and the sky is future, and all this sort of like deep motivic thematic stuff. I don't know how literally it should be taken, but it all definitely hangs together in a lot of ways. And there's a tap dance that I do about why it looks like technology and all sorts of stuff because you kind of have to like answer all the counterpoints as best you can. But that's sort of like the 10,000 foot view. And I really do sort of land on something that's sort of reincarnative in a big weird way. Like, there's probably parts of each of us here that's like, 10% Zeta Reticulum, and each of us got 5% of Cleopatra throughout all of, like there's a
Yeah.
lot of different ways to think about it, but it does sort of end up being this sort of holistic theory of everything that I still kind of suspect might be what's going on. But the key, I think, is to sort of approach it as an open-handed idea as opposed to a closed-handed idea. Be like, hey, it kind of looks like this. Anybody else? Anybody else got any other ideas? That's really where I want to be. Um, and I think that. So from that, I wrote a novel, and then from the novel, I wrote Fourth Wall Phantoms, and I think that like this idea still kind of plays with Fourth Wall Phantoms
I
well
think
because
so
I'm
too.
not sure that the imaginal isn't where we go when we die. Like I'm not sure that that's not a mutually exclusive thing
No.
because I know that a lot of people who have passed on are still alive in my head, in
Yeah.
my heart.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that those are necessarily mutually exclusive. Um, which is why but the frustrating thing is, y'all, is that like, I mean, you wrote about a book about the paranormal and death. It's 250,000 words. And then you wrote a book about like what reality is. Like, what do you, like, there's nowhere you can't scale that up, right? Like it doesn't scale. Like, it's like, so I'll give y'all a scoop. I've not talked about this
Okay. Yes.
anywhere. Um, but I'm not going to reveal the title yet, but I am going to reveal the subject matter. The next book is on a phenomenon that I've been really preoccupied with and interested in a while. I had to scale back because there's nowhere else to go. Um, there's a phenomenon in the West Country of England about being pixie led, which is this idea that you go to you're walking home and in the most extreme version, like you're stuck in a field and you can't find the gate that you just walked through, right? You can't even
Right.
backtrack because you're just stuck there. But it's also compulsions to wander and whatnot. And I, it's the Josh Cutchin shtick at this point. Like, okay, well, I bet we see that everywhere, don't we? And nobody has really sort of gone looking for it like that. But you see it with the anomalous lights, you see it with ghosts, you see it with cryptids,
Hmm.
you see it with the UFO stuff. So that's the first half of it is the pixie led part. And the second half of it is saying, oh, that's only half the story.
Oh shit. Ooh.
Ooh.
Well, um, I make my best case for the fact that the instances of supernatural stoppage, so those cars being stopped by UFOs and things like that,
Okay.
are a variation on this idea.
Oh.
And like the biggest strokes are like, well, yeah, you, you don't get where you're going in both cases, right? Like that's
Right.
or
Okay.
you're delayed, you're held back for a while. So like, and I make a better case for that. So anyway, so the first half of the book is the pixie led, and the second half of the book is saucer stopped, right? Um, but also like, I don't think anybody's really found like 14. I don't think anybody's put together like 14 cases of Bigfoot stopping cars, So it's a lot of that stuff. It's a lot of that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, like fairies stopping cars and UFOs stopping horses and stuff that you just wouldn't really expect, and just sort of saying, okay, what does this sort of show us about the phenomenon? And really, again, it's just, I'm sure that some people are probably tired of me saying, hey, look, it's all the same thing, but like, it's the message still hasn't really gone through yet. So I'm going to keep on
No.
doing that. And I want to show you that, like, yeah, all supernatural stuff will lead you and all supernatural stuff will stop you. And it doesn't matter if you're in a boat or with a goat or in a box with a fox. No, I had to. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're in a boat or in a car or riding a horse. Like, we see these same things over and over again, regardless of transportation, regardless of what we're interfacing with. So that's
Right.
that's that book, and God willing, I'm going to finish the last two chapters this week, and I'm thinking maybe July or August, if God willing. So,
Heck yeah. Oh,
Yay.
we'd love to have you back when it
and
comes
then I
out.
don't
That
want to
sounds
write
great.
anything for a long time. I'm
Yeah.
tired. I'm tired. I'm so tired. Yeah.
Get back into like
Yeah.
maybe playing some jams for a little bit and take a break
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
writing.
exactly. Well, that's the. I'm sure that you've experienced this too, Shell. It's like, you know, you can only stay in this mode for so long. Like, I joked about shifting out of music mode into this, but like, you can only stay here for so long, or else I think it'll eat your lunch.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So just to be able to be like, oh, I'm gonna go music now is so important. And I always try to encourage people whenever I can, like, have interests in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be well rounded. And actually, if you all will excuse me for just 1 minute, there's something I need to attend to, and I'll be right back.
Certainly, certainly. What I kind of like about, and like, they don't have to, right? The things that I talk about, the ideas that I talk about, they don't have to sort of play together, but like, they can if you kind of tilt your head and squint. Um, and I think that's what a lot of people get sort of pixie led by, right? Like,
Right.
they sort of get off on these tangents where it's like, I don't know if I can make this bit of research or this perspective align with that bit of research or that perspective. And I don't think that's the way a lot of this works. I don't think that's the way, quite frankly, life works. But well, I think that this is the point in the timeline when we can make the most out of applied weirdness, right? If that makes
Yes.
any sense,
Ooh.
um because this is the, I mean, I had I'm sure you might have seen this, you might have not, but like, of course, this is when we get like disclosure gains, is with
Yes.
this environment and this climate and this,
Yes.
the players behind all this. Like, of course, this is when we get it, because like, it's always going to be sort of in this realm of this dubious realm, and it's trickster times, and it's
Yeah.
liminal times, and it's all these things, right? But
Hmm.
the thing is like, we don't have to allow this stuff to happen to us, right? Like,
Right.
if this is how weird and um if this is how weird and malleable reality has gotten, then by God, like, it can be. used for the inverse of anything that we're going through right now.
Yes.
And I just wish more people would understand that, because I do think that there's help in numbers in this regard.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it necessarily has to be as elaborate as like a formalized ritual. I think it's just like living your life as you want it to be in small ways, and then sort of the critical mass that happens from hundreds of thousands of, or maybe millions of people doing that.
Yeah, it just takes one person figuring out how to pop that lid off the jar.
Yeah. No.
Exactly. And the narratives that we tell ourselves and tell others.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and this is kind of weird territory too, because like you can see how people could take it into like, oh, you're a cancer victim because you have a bad attitude, and there's people in like the alternate health community who would say stuff like that. So I think that there should be a line that's drawn,
Agreed.
at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think it's another one of those both and things, right? Like, I think that it's a combination of both. I think that there is something to positive thinking and telling yourself your own narratives and allowing them to manifest, but I don't think that can always supersede environmental factors.
Exactly.
Right.
And similarly, I don't think that environmental factors can always supersede a really good story or a really good mental projection or a really good spiritual soup that you're floating in. I think that it's a both and all the time, both and all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, if you're, like playing around with the shielding around the demon court, really at a certain point doesn't matter what your narrative is, right?
Yes.
Like, if you're familiar with that story, like with the radiation event. So yeah, I get what you're saying. That is just, I'm gonna say it, phenomenal.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm not trying to be a guru or anything. I just think I just think that, again, this is why I enjoy having conversations with people like y'all, is because like this is where these conversations should go, right? It shouldn't get hung up on, in 1972, Colonel Dumblenut Bugwit was, at Wright Patterson and saw, an alien fart in a tube. Like, I don't like nobody. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
It's not.
I mean, I don't know.
I mean, that's a pretty good. I would kind of be there for that.
Yeah.
But
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. These are the conversations, the big picture conversations, the conversations that point toward aspirationally bettering ourselves and the world around us.
Yes.
And I think, again, and it's important to like, for as often as these topics can be weaponized in nasty ways, I think it's important to remember that this is the inverse, the flip side of that, can be used for good things,
Yeah. I don't know what else to say. I'd like to end the show on that.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into another episode of the Eternal Void, but with Jazz podcast. We'll be back next week with another great episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you like the conversation. It really helps us, along with ratings, to help us reach more people. If you want to help us keep the lights on, you can wad up a couple dollars and throw it up the internet pipes to us via our Ko-Fi link in the show notes. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.